Okay, so here we are talking about management and management principles. And this is the third lesson in the suite that make up the recorded lessons for this program, this module. And you know me now to look to be sharing a screen with you. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. We're talking here about the evolution of management thought and for the second week of lectures. And it is very distinctly part 2 of this whole exercise. Okay, so let's not delay. In our last session, and you see the green tick over there, I covered those aspects. The big deal was, well, the fact that over the 1900s, we thought about what management is and what management should be, and we've got this pretty shrewd idea as to what it is and how to go about it. And we drew this picture because we find that there are different phases. In the last lesson, we looked at the scientific management theories and administrative management theories, and now we're looking at the human theories. And the human theories are about interpersonal relationships. And we know what this is about because we understand from Henry Mintzberg, remember him from the first lesson? Henry Mintzberg told us that managers wear 3 hats. Sometimes you're wearing a decision maker's hat. Take it off and you put on an informational hat. Take that off and put on an interpersonal hat. And we're looking particularly at the interpersonal hat over here, using words and relationships and feelings to get people to do stuff. That's what it's about. So this woman, Mary Parker Follett, a social worker, absolutely critical to this. And as a social worker, she was repulsed by what she saw as exploitation in terms of management science. She said, these are people, they're living, breathing human beings, and you don't treat them as badly as this. So her work was, as you might expect a social worker's work to be, about making people feel happier in what they were doing. We had an enormous number of studies, the Hawthorne studies. We looked at levels of light that were available in the workplace, and said, if we make the lights bright, do people work harder? If we make the lights dimmer, do they work harder? And people don't want gaudy, bright lights, depending on what they're doing, of course. And they like to actually sit around the table and talk to each other. So the point of the human relations school of thought is that you have to try and make the workplace a convivial thing, a place where people can enjoy themselves, a place where they can express themselves, a place where they feel free of mind as opposed to set upon. So even though they raised the light levels and lowered the light levels in these Hawthorne studies, what they found was that worker productivity was increasing. But the study over 2 years failed initially to take into account the fact that they were allowing the women to talk to each other. They were basically just getting on like a house on fire. They were chatting and chatting and chatting. Happened to be at the Western Electric Company. Took place over a significant period of time. So the findings, the outcome, was that how hard people work is something which is affected by how they feel about their managers. And that is the Hawthorne effect, and that is effectively the birth of the human relations movement. So the behavior of managers and workers in a work setting is as important in explaining the level of performance as the technical aspects of the task. And the feelings, the thoughts, and behavior of work group members and managers affect business performance. Okay, so those are the human theories. Okay, and that was something which was going to give way to management science, and management science was something I was introduced to in 1980 when I got to university, or 1982 as it turns out, and that means it's roughly there, and I got to it at the tail end. And it is like the maths side of management. It's quantitative management, and that's what we studied it as at university that many years ago, quantitative management. So recognize as an approach to management focusing on the use of rigorous quantitative techniques to help managers make maximum use of resources to produce goods and services. It sounds very much like efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity again. Okay, it's something which uses maths, and it provides opportunity to calculate, for example, how best to pack a truck. You think about South African breweries packing beer for deliveries to bottle stores. They don't pack one truck for one bottle store. They pack one truck for 10 bottle stores. But how do they unpack the truck? So if they put everything that's going to be taken off first on the one side of the truck, it's going to be something which leans to one side, not so. So they'll distribute the load. If you've ever flown in an aircraft to Johannesburg or Cape Town or Nairobi or wherever else, you'll know that they distribute people across the aeroplane in order to balance the aircraft out. In much the same way, South African breweries make sure that they balance their trucks. So management science theory gave us, with computers, because it depended on computers, management information systems, or ways of collecting data and storing data and manipulating data that we could retrieve in order to produce evidence that we could use for decision making. And that then was something which was going to give rise to the modern approaches and this notion of the organizational environment and how that affects a business. So we know about the 5M model, no problem. But managers need to acquire raw materials to produce goods. They need to acquire component parts to produce goods, and they need operating supplies to run the business. Absolutely essential that they have those three things, plus the human resources, the workers, to make this work. And if you see that as a system, we can think of the system as being open or closed. And a closed system is something which doesn't interact with its environment, and it's likely to decay, whereas an open system is something which is constantly moving goods out into the ecosystem and bringing more raw materials into the ecosystem. So we draw it as this input-output model that you see in front of you over here. I think that you're going to have to read the book, not so, in order to get a handle on this. So I have to ask you what comes now, because that's the point we've reached. We've run out of these little arrows that you see on the chart in front of you. Now what happens in the year 2024? What's next for us? What's next on the horizon? I believe that this is what we refer to as contingency theory. And contingency theory, as you see there, there's no one best way to organize. Rapidly changing environments create a greater need for managers to respond quickly and effectively. That means that we structure our organizations according to the nature of the environment we operate within and the nature of the things we're producing in our factories. So the example over here, for example, is McDonald's and KFC do the same thing again and again and again and again with no difference. We say, okay, if that's the case and people's jobs aren't changing, then let's be very mechanical about it, hence mechanistic structure, as opposed to the funky organizations. Artificial intelligence, for example, is bringing us large language models, and OpenAI produce ChatGPT for us, and their structures are what we refer to as organic. In other words, over the last 120 years, as we've thought about how businesses work and what they do, how they function, and our role in them, and our role as managers in them, we're saying, can we find any patterns The pattern we've arrived at now is to say it's contingent. It depends. It depends on the environment. And if it depends on the environment, I'm going to say, put your head in the books, read about what the authors have to say, and let me remind you what you have to be able to do. In this particular section, do you understand that timeline? And can you point out the major developments across the timeline? Because that's the essential thing. So with that in mind, I'll pause it over there and say, let's wait for the next recording.